My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm 78 years old, a retired school teacher, and the proud owner of a large countryside house that's been in my family for 3 generations. People say I'm gentle, loving, and far too forgiving, especially when it comes to my only daughter, Linda, and her husband, Mark. I have spent my entire life giving to them, my time, my money, my heart. I thought I had raised a daughter who valued me. I thought wrong. It was supposed to be a peaceful return. I had left town for a short retreat, a few days to clear my mind after feeling increasingly like an unwanted guest in my own home. When I returned for the reading of my late husband's will, I expected hugs, perhaps even relief that I was back. Instead, I stepped into the hallway, my suitcase still in hand, and what I heard nearly stopped my heart. Linda's voice, sharp as a knife, whispered to her husband, "If she dies before Wednesday, we get everything." My breath caught, but I didn't make a sound. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. The silence in the hall was so thick it felt like it was swallowing me whole. I wanted to cry, to run, to confront them, but instead I stood still, hidden in the shadows, and listened. Mark chuckled, the sound cold and cruel. "She's old. It won't take much. Just a little accident." My knees weakened, but I held myself upright. They thought I had left for good, that I wasn't even in the house. They didn't know I was standing right there, every word stabbing into me like a dagger. My daughter, the little girl I raised through sickness, who clung to me when storms scared her at night, was now plotting my death for money. I didn't cry. Not a single tear fell. My hands trembled, but my mind was suddenly sharper than it had been in years. They didn't know I was still standing. They didn't know the fire they had just lit inside me. I quietly stepped back, clutching my phone. My heart was breaking, but it was also hardening. That's when I called my lawyer. You won't believe what happened next.
Stay tuned.
If this story gripped you, like, comment, and subscribe because the truth is only just beginning to unfold. I barely remember walking out of that house. My legs felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me into the cool night air. The words I had just heard echoed in my head like a haunting melody. If she dies before Wednesday, we get everything. I clutched my coat tighter around me as if it could protect me from the betrayal that had just burned my soul. As soon as I was far enough from the house, I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, Mr. Stephen Harris. Stephen had been a trusted friend of my late husband and had handled our family's legal affairs for decades. When he answered, his voice was calm, but I could tell he sensed the urgency in my tone. "Eleanor, are you all right?" he asked.
No, Stephen.
"I'm not," I replied, my voice trembling but steady. "I just overheard something you need to know. My own daughter and her husband, they're plotting to kill me. For the inheritance." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Where are you right now?" "On my way to the hotel by the old train station. I'm not going back to that house tonight." "Good," he said firmly. "Stay somewhere safe. I'll come to you first thing in the morning. We need to act fast." When I finally reached the small hotel, I collapsed onto the bed. Memories of Linda's childhood flooded my mind. Her laughter, her tears, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck. How could she have turned into someone who wished me dead? That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the door, listening to every creak in the hallway, fearing they had already realized I knew. The next morning, Stephen arrived, a leather briefcase in hand. His gray eyes were filled with determination. "Eleanor, we're going to make sure they don't get a single penny unless you decide they should. But we need to play this smart." We spent hours going through every detail of my will, my assets, and the possible ways Linda and Mark might try to harm me. Stephen suggested moving my accounts and property titles to a trust that only I controlled. I agreed. We also decided to set up hidden cameras around the house once I returned because I was going back. Yes, back into the lion's den. "You're sure about this?" Stephen asked, concern etched on his face. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but cold. "If they want to play this game, I'll let them. But I'll be the one writing the rules." That evening, I walked back into my home as if nothing had happened. Linda greeted me with a forced smile, her eyes scanning me as though she was measuring how long I had left. Mark stayed in the background, his expression unreadable. I smiled back sweetly, hiding the storm that raged inside me. Every move they made from that point on, I watched. Every word they whispered, I recorded. And as the days crept closer to Wednesday, their desperation grew. They thought I was just a week-old woman. They had no idea the trap was already closing around them. But what I discovered next made my blood run cold and forced me to act even faster. The night before Tuesday, I sat in my bedroom pretending to read, though my heart was pounding louder than any clock on the wall. Every creak of the floorboards outside my room felt like a warning. The cameras Stephen had arranged were well hidden, tiny eyes watching from the corners of the hallway, the kitchen, even the garden. I checked the feed from my phone under the blanket, the glow of the screen lighting my worried face. Around midnight, I saw Linda quietly enter the kitchen. My stomach tightened. She wasn't getting a midnight snack. She was whispering to Mark on the phone. "It has to happen tomorrow," she hissed, her voice sharp. "By Wednesday morning, she'll be gone, and everything will be ours." Mark's voice came through the speaker faintly. "I've already handled it. Stop worrying. Just make sure she drinks the tea." My blood froze.
The tea?
I glanced at the cup on my bedside table, still full. My throat went dry as I realized how close I'd come to sipping it earlier when she had so sweetly offered to make me something to help me sleep. I quietly set the cup aside, my hands trembling. I needed proof. So I left it there untouched and kept recording. The next morning, Linda walked in with a fake smile plastered across her face. "Morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" "I did," I lied, smiling back. "The tea helped." I saw her eyes flicker with satisfaction, and it made my heart twist. Later, I called Stephen again. "They're trying to poison me," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I have proof." "Good," he replied firmly. "Keep collecting evidence. We'll deliver it to the police when the time is right. But Eleanor, you have to stay strong. You can't let them suspect you know." That day, I acted as if nothing was wrong. I laughed with them at the breakfast table, complimented Linda's cooking, and even thanked her for being so thoughtful. Inside, though, I was a hurricane of pain and fury. As the sun set, I overheard them arguing in the living room. "She's still alive." Linda snapped. Mark growled back. "Then we'll do it ourselves. Tonight. No more waiting." My knees almost gave out, but I kept my face neutral when I walked past them. They didn't know every word was being recorded, every plan documented. That night, I slept with my phone under my pillow and the police on speed dial. But before I could make the call, something happened that made me realize the danger was even worse than I thought. Someone had cut the wires to the security system. I held my breath, clutching the phone in the dark as I heard footsteps creeping closer to my room. The doorknob turned slowly. I gripped my phone so tightly I thought it would shatter in my hands. Through the small crack of my door, I saw a shadow stretching across the floor. My breath caught in my throat. The creak of the hinges felt deafening in the silence of the night. Mark stepped into my room first, a dark silhouette holding something metallic, maybe a wrench, maybe a pipe. Behind him, Linda tiptoed in, clutching a pillow, like she was ready to smother me in my sleep. I stayed perfectly still, eyes half closed, breathing slowly to fake being asleep. My heart was screaming, but I kept my face calm. "She's out," Linda whispered. Mark raised the object in his hand. "This ends tonight." Before he could take another step, I pressed the emergency button on my phone. The alarm I had set up through a hidden app blared so loudly it echoed through the house like a siren. Lights from the hallway flicked on automatically, another trap Stephen had arranged. Startled, Mark dropped the object, and Linda gasped, backing toward the door. "What's going on?" I shouted, sitting up suddenly. My voice was shaking, but it was loud enough to make them freeze. They stammered, scrambling for words. We thought you were sick," Linda lied, her face pale. "We were just checking on you." "Checking on me with a pipe?" I pointed at the object on the floor. They were caught, but I didn't let them see how terrified I really was. I stared at them coldly. Get out of my room. They left without another word, their faces pale with fear. I locked the door, my hands trembling. That night, I didn't close my eyes. The cameras had recorded everything. Every step, every word, every attempt they made to kill me. The next morning, Stephen arrived earlier than ever. He looked at the footage with a hard expression. This is attempted murder, Eleanor. We have enough to go to the police. But we need to time this right to make sure they face the full consequences. I agreed, but a part of me wanted to see just how far they would go. They still thought I was clueless, and that ignorance would be their downfall. Later that day, Linda tried to act normal, offering me breakfast with a shaky smile. Mom, you look pale. Are you okay? I'm fine, dear, I said sweetly, sipping coffee I had made myself. Inside, I was seething. Every bite of food they offered, every drink they handed me, I avoided like poison because it probably was. That evening, I overheard another chilling conversation. This time, they weren't just whispering. They were arguing loudly. She won't die. Linda cried. What if she finds out? Mark hissed back. She won't. She's an old woman. She doesn't suspect a thing. Tomorrow, we'll handle it our way. Their way terrified me, but I also knew they had just sealed their own fate. I sent the recordings to Stephen that night, my hands steady. For the first time, I felt in control. But then, something unexpected happened that changed everything. The very next morning, Linda collapsed in the kitchen, gasping for air, and Mark screamed for me to call an ambulance. Why was my daughter the one on the floor, and not me? What had happened? I rushed into the kitchen, my heart pounding. Linda was on the floor clutching her throat, her face turning red as she struggled to breathe. Mark was kneeling beside her, panicking. Call an ambulance. She's choking, he yelled, his voice breaking with fear. For a brief second, I froze. The image of my daughter, my little girl, suffering on the floor tore at my heart. Despite everything, she was still my child. I grabbed the phone and called emergency services, my voice steady but cold. As we waited, Mark kept shouting at me, "Do something. Don't just stand there." I knelt beside Linda, but I didn't touch her. "What did you eat?" I asked calmly. She tried to speak but only wheezed. Her eyes darted toward the half-empty cup of tea on the counter. My heart stopped. That was my cup of tea, the one I had left untouched the night before. The cup she had probably poisoned. She had drunk her own trap. When the paramedics arrived, they rushed her to the hospital. Mark stayed behind with me, pacing like a trapped animal. His face was pale, his hands trembling. He finally turned to me. You knew, didn't you?" I looked him straight in the eye and said nothing. Silence can be more powerful than words. Later that day, Stephen met me at the hospital. Linda was stable, recovering from what the doctors confirmed was a severe allergic reaction to a substance in the tea. They couldn't identify the exact toxin yet, but I already knew. She poisoned herself, Stephen said quietly after hearing my account. Irony at its finest. But this doesn't clear them. If anything, it gives us more proof of intent. Mark avoided me the entire time, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The predator had become the prey. He knew everything was unraveling. When Linda woke up, her eyes met mine, filled not with remorse but with anger. She didn't apologize. Instead, she whispered, "You think this changes anything? It doesn't. You're still standing in our way." Those words pierced me, but they also gave me strength. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice, about protecting myself from people who no longer saw me as their mother, but as an obstacle. That night, I stayed at the hospital, watching her sleep while Mark sat in the corner. I kept my phone recording, capturing every conversation. I caught him muttering under his breath, "We'll finish this one way or another." The next morning, Stephen called with news that made my blood run cold. "Eleanor, we have to move now. They're planning something even bigger. I've been tipped off. They've tried to access your financial accounts." I left the hospital quietly and went straight to the bank with Stephen. We froze every account, moved all assets into a protected trust, and changed every password. My daughter and her husband had nothing left to control. But when I returned home, I found something that chilled me to the bone, scratched into my bedroom door were the words, "You won't make it to Wednesday." I didn't cry. I smiled. Because by then, my plan was already in motion. What happened on Wednesday morning will shock you to your core. Stay tuned, because the storm Eleanor is about to unleash will change everything. If you're following this journey, like, comment, and subscribe, because the fight is just getting started. Wednesday morning arrived like the calm before a deadly storm. The sun rose softly over the countryside, but in my heart, I felt only fire.
Today was the day they said I would die.
Instead, it would be the day everything turned on them. Stephen arrived early, carrying a small box of legal documents. "Are you ready for this, Eleanor?" he asked. I nodded. More than ready. Inside that box were the updated deeds, trust documents, and most importantly, a new will that left nothing to Linda and Mark. Every penny, every brick of my house, every piece of land would go to charity and to a scholarship fund in my late husband's name. If they wanted to fight me for it, they would be fighting thin air. As I sipped coffee I had brewed myself, Mark entered the room, his eyes narrowed. "You look different," he said cautiously. "Do I?" I asked, tilting my head. "Maybe I've just realized something." Linda returned home from the hospital just after noon. She walked in slowly, pale and weak, but her eyes still burned with hatred. "You should have died by now," she muttered under her breath, thinking I couldn't hear. But I did. And I recorded it. That afternoon, Stephen helped me set up the final trap. Cameras were rolling, microphones hidden in every corner. The police had also been alerted. They were watching, waiting for the right moment to catch them in the act. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was making sure they could never hurt anyone else. As the evening approached, Linda and Mark became restless. I watched them whispering together in the living room, their eyes darting toward me like vultures circling prey. They didn't know the prey had turned predator. Around 9 p.m., Mark tried to lure me outside, claiming the car had a flat tire and he needed help. "Come take a look," he said with forced cheerfulness. "No, thank you," I replied sweetly. "I think I'll stay in tonight." His jaw tightened, and he stormed out to the driveway. I could see him pacing through the window, muttering angrily into his phone. Linda sat on the couch, gripping something in her hand. When I walked past, I saw it, a small vial of liquid, the same one she must have used before. That's when the police stepped in. 2 officers hidden nearby entered the house at Stephen's signal. "Mark Johnson and Linda Johnson, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder." The shock on their faces was priceless. Linda screamed, "Mom, what have you done?" I stood tall, my hands steady. What I had to do. They were handcuffed, their protests falling on deaf ears. I watched as they were taken away, my heart breaking and healing at the same time. This was my daughter, yes, but also my would-be killer. Stephen placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now, Eleanor. You did the right thing." But I knew this wasn't the end. The trial was coming, and with it, all their secrets would spill out. And there was still something hidden in this house, something I found later that night, tucked inside Mark's briefcase. A passport, cash, and a one-way ticket to Mexico for 2 people, leaving Wednesday at dawn. They had planned to kill me and vanish forever. Now, I had to decide, would I testify against my own daughter? Or would I let her rot in silence? The following days felt like a blur. My house was quiet, almost too quiet, after Linda and Mark were taken away. Yet every room still smelled of betrayal. I walked through the hallway, touching the walls my husband had built with his bare hands, and I thought of all the laughter that had once filled this place. Now those memories were poisoned, just like the tea they tried to feed me. Stephen came over with stacks of paperwork. "The DA wants you to testify, Eleanor," he said, his tone cautious. "Your testimony, combined with the recordings, will make the case airtight. But it also means you'll have to face her in court." I sat there for a long moment, staring at my hands. These were the hands that had raised her, wiped her tears, cooked her meals. To stand in a courtroom and point at my own daughter as a murderer felt like a betrayal of my own heart. Yet what about her betrayal of me? They wanted me dead, Stephen, I finally said. I'll testify. The day of the trial, I wore the same pearl necklace my husband gave me on our wedding anniversary. It reminded me of strength, of dignity. As I walked into the courthouse, the air was heavy with whispers. Reporters had caught wind of the case, an elderly mother accusing her daughter and son-in-law of attempted murder over an inheritance. It was scandalous, almost unbelievable. When Linda entered the courtroom, she avoided my eyes. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her chin was raised in defiance. Mark sat beside her, cold and silent. They looked less like a married couple and more like criminals about to face judgment. The prosecutor played the recordings for the jury. My heart pounded as the chilling words echoed through the room. If she dies before Wednesday, we get everything. Gasps filled the courtroom. Linda's face flushed red, while Mark's jaw tightened. Then came my turn. I stood, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength with every word. I told the jury everything, how I overheard them, how I pretended to be asleep when they entered my room, how I discovered the vial, how I called the lawyer, how the police arrived just in time. When I looked at Linda, she finally met my gaze. Her eyes glistened with something I couldn't read, anger, fear, maybe even regret. But she said nothing. The defense tried to twist the story, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that the recordings were taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury's faces told me everything. They didn't believe a word of it. After the session ended, I sat alone in the hallway outside the courtroom. My heart felt heavy. No mother dreams of this moment, having to destroy her own child to save herself. Stephen sat beside me. You did what you had to do. Justice isn't easy, Eleanor. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of Linda as a little girl, running through the yard, laughing. I wondered where that little girl went, and when the darkness entered her heart. The verdict would come the next day. And with it, the final piece of my decision, what I would do with the inheritance they had tried to kill me for. But before I could close my eyes, I heard a faint tapping on my window. When I looked out, a dark figure was standing by the tree line, watching me. Mark was supposed to be in jail. So, who was standing outside my house? The figure at the tree line didn't move. My breath fogged the glass as I pressed closer to the window, trying to make out the face. My heart hammered so loudly it drowned out the crickets chirping outside. Then the figure stepped forward just enough for the moonlight to hit his face. It was Mark. How? How is this possible? I whispered to myself. He had been in police custody. There was no way he should be standing outside my house. He raised a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay quiet. My stomach churned. Fear gripped me, but beneath it was a growing fire of rage. I grabbed my phone and called Stephen. Mark is here, I whispered.
What?
That's impossible. He's supposed to be in holding until the verdict, Stephen said, his voice tense. Well, he's here, watching me. Lock the doors, Eleanor.
Do not open them.
I'm calling the police right now. I hung up and double-checked every lock in the house. My fingers trembled as I slid the deadbolts in place. Mark circled the house slowly, tapping the windows with his knuckles as he walked. His voice carried through the glass. You think you've won, old woman? You think you can destroy us? I'll make sure you never testify again. I grabbed a kitchen knife and stood behind the door, my heart pounding. Minutes felt like hours until flashing red and blue lights finally lit up my yard. Mark bolted into the woods like a coward, disappearing into the darkness before the police reached him. The officers searched the area but found nothing. They promised to keep patrol cars near my property until the trial ended. That night, I didn't sleep a single second. The next morning in court, the prosecutor dropped the bombshell. Mark had escaped custody during a transfer. The jury's faces hardened, their decision becoming clearer by the minute. Linda sat there, wide-eyed, realizing her husband had made things even worse. By afternoon, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. Linda broke down crying. pleading with the judge for mercy. Mark was still at large, but the sentence was already decided. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. My daughter was being led away in handcuffs, screaming, "Mom, please, help me." I couldn't move. The pain in my chest was unbearable, but I stayed seated, tears streaming silently down my face. Stephen leaned close and whispered, "You've done it, Eleanor. You're free."
But was I?
That night, I returned home to a house that felt like a ghost of what it once was. Every creak, every shadow reminded me of what I had lost. Then, as I sat by the fireplace, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. When I answered, a deep voice said, "You think this is over? I'm coming back for you." The line went dead. The nightmare wasn't finished yet. I hung up the phone slowly, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The voice on the other end wasn't just threatening, it was promising. Mark was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and he was coming for me. The police were looking, but I knew men like him. He wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Stephen called minutes later, his voice calm but urgent. "Eleanor, we have to move you to a safe location until Mark is caught." "No," I said firmly. "This is my home. I won't run from him." "Eleanor, he's dangerous. He's desperate." "I know," I replied. "And that's exactly why he'll make a mistake. I'm not the one who should be afraid." That night, I prepared. I double-locked every door, set up additional cameras, and even kept the kitchen knife under my pillow. My lawyer had given me a small panic button that connected directly to the police. I kept it in my hand as I sat in the dark, waiting. Hours passed. Just when I thought maybe he wouldn't come, I heard it, the sound of a window sliding open in the back of the house. My heart raced, but I stayed silent, crouching behind the hallway wall. Footsteps crept inside. Mark's voice hissed, "Eleanor, come out. Old woman. You can't hide from me." He thought I was hiding, but I was watching. The cameras captured everything as he moved through the house, knife in his hand. I waited until he passed me, then pressed the panic button. The silent alarm triggered, alerting the police. He turned just in time to see me standing there, holding my phone. "You shouldn't have done this to us," he snarled. "You shouldn't have tried to kill me," I replied coldly. He lunged, but I ducked behind the hallway table, knocking it over to slow him. He stumbled, cursing, just as the red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The front door burst open, and officers stormed in, tackling him to the ground. Mark screamed and fought, but they dragged him out in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Eleanor. You'll regret this." I stood there shaking, clutching my chest, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I allowed myself to cry, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had happened. The nightmare was finally over. The next day, the news spread everywhere. Mark had been captured, and both he and Linda were facing life sentences. My home was safe again, but it no longer felt the same. Betrayal leaves scars you can't see. Stephen came by with the final papers. "It's done," he said softly. "The trust is protected. They'll never touch a cent of your inheritance." I signed the documents with steady hands. Then it's time to rebuild. Not the house, the life they tried to steal from me. But just when I thought peace had returned, I received a letter in the mail the following morning. No return address, just 5 chilling words scrawled in black ink. "We're not the only ones." My hands trembled as I read it over and over. What did it mean? Who else was involved? I stared at the letter, my heart pounding harder with each passing second. "We're not the only ones." The words felt like poison, seeping into my bones. Who else could possibly be involved? I thought it was just Linda and Mark. But this message, this warning, said otherwise. Stephen rushed over the moment I called him. He examined the letter carefully. "No fingerprints, no DNA," he muttered. "Whoever sent this knew what they were doing. Eleanor, this could mean there were others in on the plan, maybe someone who helped them, or someone who stood to gain if you were gone." I felt sick. "You mean family?" He didn't answer, but his silence told me everything. That evening, I invited my extended family over under the pretense of a casual dinner. Cousins, nieces, nephews. They all came, smiling, hugging me, acting as if nothing had happened. I watched every one of them closely. I was searching for the one who flinched, the one who looked guilty. Halfway through dinner, I mentioned casually, "It's strange, even after Linda and Mark were arrested, I got a letter saying they weren't the only ones involved." The room went silent. Forks froze midair. Eyes darted nervously. And then my nephew Greg, always the charming one, laughed nervously and said, "People will do anything to scare you these days." But his hand was trembling. After everyone left, I checked the security cameras again. Greg had stayed behind a few minutes longer than everyone else, slipping something into his car. I sent the footage to Stephen, and within hours, the police were knocking on Greg's door. They found a stash of documents, copies of my will, fake passports, and correspondence between him and Mark. Greg had been helping them, feeding them information and planning to take his share once I was gone. When they arrested him, I stood at the edge of the driveway, watching as he was dragged away. "Why, Greg?" I asked. He smirked bitterly. "Because you never shared enough. You had everything, and we had nothing." The words stung, but they also revealed the truth. Greed had eaten away at people I once loved. In court, Greg confessed everything, exposing how he had secretly aided Linda and Mark. The case was now airtight. They would all spend the rest of their lives behind bars. After the trial ended, I stood in the empty courtroom, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and peace. I had lost a daughter, a son-in-law, and now a nephew, but I had kept my life and my dignity. Stephen placed the final papers in my hands. "Eleanor, it's over." I looked out the window at the rising sun.
No, Stephen.
It's a new beginning. I donated nearly all my wealth to charities and schools, setting up a scholarship in my husband's name. The house, once a place of betrayal, became a refuge for women in need. I chose to turn my pain into something meaningful. To those who plotted against me, they will spend their days behind bars thinking about the mother, the aunt, the woman they tried to destroy. They thought they could break me. Instead, they made me stronger. As I stood on my porch, watching the wind sway the trees, I whispered to myself, "Justice doesn't burn easy, and neither do I." If this story touched your heart and showed you that strength has no age limit, like, comment, and subscribe. Because no matter how dark the storm, the sun always rises again.